everybody, welcome to APL Readers Corner. Thank you for joining us this month. If you haven't watched APL Readers Corners before, we're usually here and we pick a book from a different genre every month, and we kind of review the genre and review the book and kind of let you guys know what we thought about it and if you should read other books in that genre or like that particular book that we are reading. So most of the books are available on Hoopla, so you can access that with your library card and you can download those books for free. I want to say you get 7 books a month. Yeah, 7 books a month for free. And they're available right away, so you don't have to wait like Overdrive. So it's very convenient. I like this service a lot. So if you like the book that we're talking about this month, you can instantly go and read it. This month, for February, we are reading Carnegie's Maid by Benedict. So this was a really fun read. I really enjoyed it. And I'm here with Nicole. My name is Tessie. First of all, this genre. So we picked historical fiction. So what do you find most interesting about historical fiction, Nicole?
Well, besides the obvious, historical fiction is stories set in the past,
Yeah.
obviously. Some of the cool things I found was there were 3 common themes, and they were unobtrusive, authenticity, and sensitivity. So unobtrusive is the history depends on a believable and reasonably accurate setting, often includes actual historical personages, events in historical fiction, and they're either the creations of the author's imagination. They're not fully historic, obviously. Authenticity, it makes sure to convey the flavor of the period, the sight, the sound, the smells, the characteristics. They use language appropriate to that setting, that time and place. And they tend to stay pretty faithful to the facts of that time period. And then, not to mention, lastly, is sensitivity. Now, the writers of historical fiction, they need to be sensitive to and balance the opinions of an era, ignorance and prejudice, and they have would have no place in the author's telling of the story or perspective of the era. So they're kind of being, third person, kind of taking themselves out of it. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see how those different elements reflected in the story that we read today, but I guess we'll get to that a little bit later. But like I mentioned before, we read Carnegie's Maid by Benedict. So this book in particular, it's set in the industrial 1860s, and so it's basically at the dawn of the Carnegie Empire. So a lot of us have like maybe heard of Carnegie. I know he's pretty famous in the library world for building libraries, and so that's why one reason we picked this book, because it's like we read the summary and we're like, hey, Carnegie. But the main character of this book is an Irish immigrant, Clara Kelly, and she finds herself in desperate circumstances. So looking for a way out, she is seeking employment as a lady's maid in the home of the prominent businessman, Andrew Carnegie. So that's how he comes in. Soon, a bond between Clara and Andrew Carnegie kind of forms, and it deepens into love. But then when Clara goes missing, Carnegie search for her to unearth secrets. Well, basically his search for her unearthed secrets and revelations that laid the foundation to his lasting legacy. So that's basically the book. I thought it was really interesting that it kind of picked, and we'll get to this a little bit later on why the author decided that she wanted to pick a lady's maid to be the main character in the story, sort of about that features Andrew Carnegie, but
Yeah. Well, something you may not know about Marie Benedict is she's actually also known as Heather Terrell, and she was a lawyer for over 10 years. She was a litigator at 2 of the country's premier law firms. She found her calling in unearthing hidden historical stories of women. So she embarked on this new journey with thematically connected series of historical novels, first with The Other Einstein, who tells the tale of Albert Einstein's first wife. Interesting. The next novel in the series was Carnegie's Maid. It became USA Today's best-selling. That was released in 2018, so it's a really recent book.
nice.
And the one that followed it was one you read, Tessie, The Only Woman in the Room. The Story of the Inventor Hedy Lamarr, which was published January of 2019. She is on a roll because the following year, January 2020, Leading Clementine was published, and that's the story of Clementine Churchill. She has many other novels, New York Times bestselling publishing, and like I said, she writes as both Marie Benedict and Heather Terrell. So that was interesting.
Hmm. And before we get into sort of like the deep dive of what we liked and disliked about the book, if you read this book and you enjoy it, like you'll definitely enjoy her other books, which is why we wanted to definitely mention them. The fact that that she's kind of digging into history for these really interesting women that she's finding, definitely make her book. So like Nicole said, I read the only woman in the room. So that one I thought, like I didn't know anything about the actress that was the main character for that book before I read it. But afterwards I was like, this is a really interesting woman. So I think you go into her books reading, like you leave the book and you're like, that was a really interesting woman, which I feel like is needed a lot more in today's books, where like not even a lot more, but it's definitely something that I like seeing, is that when I read a book and it's like there's this main character who's based on a historical woman, you're like, yeah, that was something I didn't know about history. So I think that kind of makes the historical genre fiction. But the Carnegie's Maid in particular, that one has pretty high reviews. And so
So,
Amazon gives it a 4.4, Goodreads a 3.8, Hoopla gives it a 4.5. So people reading it in the Aurora Public Library District definitely like this book. So definitely if you read this book and you like it, check out her other books. They're really good. So what did you like about this book, Nicole, or dislike?
wow. For starters, I ended up listening to the audiobook version through Aurora Library through Libby, and I absolutely adored the narrator. She had an Irish accent, which really got you into the feel of Clara's character, because Clara is an immigrant from Ireland. She is the chosen one in her family to sail off to America for a better place. And spoiler, interesting to note, there was someone with the exact same name in the second class passenger cabins that must have, we think, passed away. And so when someone calls her name for employment, she's like, well, I'm technically Clara Kelly. This is what I could do. She assumes this whole other person's identity. And I think that's what I like so much about it. It was that constant, will my secret be kept? What will happen if they find who I really am, which again, she's still Clara Kelly. She's just not the Clara Kelly that they know.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a little bit of romance, and I enjoy romance every now and then, but I like that it wasn't it wasn't totally part of the story. It was just kind of like an added feature, just Carnegie kind of changing his point of view when meeting Clara, and kind of almost Clara reminding him of where he came from. And I think that was really important, especially obviously to Carnegie's character that we now know. The only thing I didn't like was I just felt it ended so quickly. It was
Mhm.
just packaged in a nice, tight, neat little bow, and then we're sent off. Clara is gone. Carnegie continues to rise in his business and his empire, and that's about it. But obviously, historical fiction. He couldn't continue with Carnegie. There's a reason for it. So that was probably my only downfall. What about you?
And it's interesting that out of all the books this author has written, that Carnegie's Maid is the one where um, the main character is not based off of a real person.
Yeah,
Um, so I know you wanted to talk about this a little bit, Nicole, and so we might as well bring it up now because I thought it was one of the most interesting parts of it, is
please
the
do.
author's note at the end, where the author is sort of saying that she was inspired by her background, her Irish background, to make this character, Kelly, um, and that she made her because she was intrigued by the mystery of Carnegie, which is that even though he was known in the business world for being ruthless, which you do see in the book,
Yeah.
you do see it, uh, that for him to suddenly decide to give away so much of his money for charities, and like we mentioned before, one of his causes was to build libraries across the world, which they go into a little bit into the book, which I thought was really, really nice and a really nice kind of I don't know what the word for it is, but it was really nice to the way it was explained, which is that Carnegie um, was so successful because he had access to a library, and so he was able to learn and educate himself and gain the skills that he would need later on to become such a successful businessman. And so he decided to share that with everybody else by building libraries that the public could enter, because apparently before that the public could not go into libraries. They were exclusively for men, and there was a slight change where, oh, on a Saturday, if you were a high status laborer, you could go into the library, but nobody else could use library. So, which is a little bit weird in this modern times. But the fact that he did all of that good was so different from his like business personality, and so she created this character of Clara Kelly to be like, she inspired him to do all of this. So I thought that was one of the best parts of the book. When I read that at the end, like everything clicked, and I was like, wow, that was really cool. Um, so I uh, I want to say the romance was a little bit. I want to, for me, the author, it felt like decided, even though the summary kind of draws you in by saying, "Oh, this is a story about Carnegie and the maid and their love story," it was more about Clara Kelly. So it was more about her trying to survive her job as a lady's maid, which now that I like hear about what this was, I'm like, oh, that sounds like a really hard job. When you read like Pride and Prejudice, you're like, oh, it must not be too bad. But no, this it sounds like it sucks. Um, her trying to survive and her trying to rein in like these positive feelings that she was having for Carnegie and being like, oh, this isn't practical, this isn't good for the life that I want for myself and my family, and her just trying to survive in this job where she's pretending to be a different Clara Kelly, and so she could keep her family alive because she was sending them money. Um, so I thought that time period was really good. I really enjoyed the historical facts. Like the little bits from the potato famine, I was like, that was really interesting. And getting to see a view of industrialized Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania was really cool. I thought that was really well done. And I really, like, I did enjoy the book when it focused on Claire Kelly, and I didn't enjoy it so much when it was romantic because I feel like it ended up in like a middle zone where it was like, it didn't deny a romance, but it didn't go all the way into like, oh, it was romance. So it was just sort of like, oh, there's a little bit of romance.
It wasn't a plane either. It was like a slow burn.
Yeah, it didn't commit to the romance. So
Well, and now that you said that, I'm thinking back about the summary that you just said. And right at the end, it says, when Clara goes missing, Carnegie unearths. And spoiler alert, that's at the end.
hmm
That summary is making it seem like she goes missing halfway through. Although, I mean, you hear about that a little bit in the intro when Carnegie
hmm
is like, oh, I miss Clara. And right away, I'm going, "Did she die? I'm
hmm
going to death." Then you get farther into it and you're like, well, wait a minute. Someone's going to eventually find out she's not who she says she is. And something's going to happen. And obviously it unfolds. She gets sent away. She can never see him again, blah, blah, blah. So that happens right at the end. So that summary is very, like you said, has hints of romance, forbidden romance, and long lost loves, and all this. And it's like, no, it's actually very opposite
yeah.
in a way. But I'm so glad you mentioned the author's note because right at the end, I was feeling so upset because I knew I had, according to my Libby, I had 15 minutes left, and I was like, that's not enough to end this book.
Yeah.
And then it ends, I think, like 5 minutes in 5 minutes, and I'm like, no, the author's note. And I was like, okay, normally I don't listen to the whole rest of the book. I'm so glad I did because then all of a sudden she divulges into, I had the inspiration for Carnegie because of this and this. And it's like, wow, that is such a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
which kind of one of my questions that I was going to ask you was, could a love interest have prompted Andrew Carnegie to build those libraries? Like, could it have been some sort of memorable friendship or partnership or experience that changed his opinions to open up free libraries?
Mm-hmm. I mean, people work in weird ways, and so maybe it was. And I really liked her point, which is that she searched history for somebody in his life to have initiated that change, and she couldn't find anybody, so she created someone who in the history books would have been invisible. So,
Yeah.
so I thought
And
that
yeah.
was not a bad explanation. I thought it was
And
clever.
it's not like he ever gave like, this is in honor of, this is in memory of. He never said what changed his mind. And, it makes me wonder because, there's a scene in a book where Claire confronts Andrew about her cousin losing his job as an iron foundry. And Andrew is just like, well, we merged. It
Sucked.
happens. Sucks to suck. And she's just like, you started at the bottom. This is where you were. Do you forget this? And you could just see, like, obviously you couldn't see it, but you could feel the change and the realization and the impact he truly has on other people that he kind of forgot.
Yeah.
So you'd almost think there had to have been just either a moment or a person or people that prompted that sudden change in him to do something like that. And to
Yeah.
think it took till the 1860s. No, yeah, end of the 1860s to get free libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was like in this like modern age where information is so easy, well, I wouldn't say so easy, but it's accessible. To kind of think that it couldn't be is a good reality check to have, I think. Makes me more appreciative.
Well, and Clara makes such good remarks in that whole book is like, if you can't give them access, how do you expect them to be better
Mm-hmm.
in their lives? How do you expect them to improve? Like, how do you expect my cousin who has no access because of his status, how do you expect him to go back into the workforce when you don't give him the resources to help him?
Mm-hmm. And
That
she's
was
like,
very,
how can I improve like her Clara herself? Because it's like if men of lower status weren't allowed in the library, women definitely were not. So I think I forgot to mention one of my favorite parts in the book is when she, I don't want to say was using him, but she was definitely during their like romantic meetings. He probably thought they were romantic, and she was like, "Oh, I can figure out how to get some business deals out of this, how to improve my life station." Because he was giving her business advice. They would go to the park,
yeah.
and he was talking about his business and how business works, and so she was taking notes the entire time, which I was like, I was very appreciative of that, and I was like, "Wow, go you!" So,
Or to even like, there was another point in that story where Andrew's having this difficult, I think it was either during the merger or after the merger, where we're having this issue, and she's like, "Well, do this," and he's just
mhm.
like, "Why didn't I think of that?" And it's like, you're right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need that outside perspective, and for it to come from a maid. That
Hmm.
even Clara Kelly, who she still views herself as way below than what she really is, and she
Hmm.
proved herself, and I love her dedication and inspiration. And yeah,
Hmm.
she was more like he's more like, let me seduce you with all the business, and she's like, uh-huh, continue.
Yeah.
This is really good stuff.
It's like this will help my flow chart. My
So what
flow
did you
chart, I'm
think
wondering.
about then their romance? Do you think it was more one-sided? Did you find it cute or adorable at all?
I would have liked a little bit more of his perspective, I guess, because without it, I think all I got was from her side, which is that she knew that it was inappropriate, but she was conflicted. I wasn't really getting the sense that she was like head over heels in love with him, but the author did put like she was jealous. Like that's a lot. I got a lot of that. She was very jealous of like whenever women were around him, like it would have made a difference, I guess. I don't know. Reading it, I'm like, you don't really have a chance, but in the end she kind of thought she had a chance, and I think he thought she had a chance, and then she was like, no, I don't have a chance. So,
I just feel like she never let herself fully
yeah.
indulge in maybe her feelings because she even said that like there were multiple times she's like, I can't let myself feel anything for you. So
Yeah.
she might have, she wouldn't let herself feel it to probably the extent that she really felt for him.
Mhm.
Again, she was also, you know, she had to keep in the back of her mind, her family,
Mhm.
family was important to her. Getting away for them to get out of their hardship was above anything she could think of. That's why she, kept her nose to the grind, so to speak, and just continued what she was doing. And
Yeah.
she was like, I can't let him, I can't, because he could ruin everything for her. The minute
Mhm.
everything unfolded, her true identity, she would lose everything. And
Mhm.
technically she did. And I have to say, pointers for her right at the end when she got kicked out. She's like, I hope Andrew doesn't find out before I take the money. Like,
Yes. Oh my goodness. I was like, please. I was worried for her because she got worried for a second that he was just playing her and that he wouldn't that he was just saying, "Oh, I got you stocks," and like he
that's
didn't
who she
really.
is.
Because I was like, "Where's the paperwork?" I was reading those whole chapters and I was like, "Where's the paperwork?" He said you got stocks, but where's the paperwork? And then finally at the end she gets the paperwork and I was like, "You better take that paper and run." So, which she did.
I love that part. She's just like, I hope he doesn't find out before I get to the bank. And I was like, you get your butt going to that bank, girly.
Mhm.
And he never did find out. I'm
Mm.
really
Yeah.
shocked that. And also, you on the mom, Mama Carnegie, man, she
Oh,
was,
I actually liked her a lot. I actually did. I think there's times when you could tell that Clara like respected her and her intelligence and what she like went through to get to where she was. And reading that respect made me respect her, even though like at the point in her life that we're seeing during the book, she's not that great. But I was like,
yeah.
she was I respect someone like that to go through all that work of like her husband like just giving up on life and her pulling the family
Oh
through
my
and
gosh,
making
yeah.
sure that they were still basically alive and didn't die in like the slums. So I respect that. And the fact that she was such a business presence in her son's life, I think definitely helped him rise because if she was like the other half of his business decisions, even though eventually it's looked like he like rose above that and started doing it on his own, but he could not have
Mhm.
gotten to where he was without his mother's help. So,
That is true, but at the same
hmm
time, because she had to work so hard to work her way up, I'm surprised she didn't see a part of herself in Clara. And, it's funny that Clara never defended herself at the end. Like, you're not even Clara Kelly. You could have been like, oh, but I am, just not the Clara Kelly you
yeah.
want.
Well,
Because she
I
never
mean,
actually lied about her name.
it's true. And personally, I don't think it was a big deal. Like, if your lady's maid is actually very good at her job, like, why are you worried about her background?
The
But
other girl died. It's not like she killed the girl and
I
then took
know,
her place. It just so happened, maybe she, I don't know, you
yeah.
could have thought of her being like, well, she did it in Clara Kelly's honor. But you're right. I mean, she let this person into her home,
hmm
the most intimate aspects of the Carnegie life.
That's true.
It could have been, she thinks, what if it was a spy giving intel to maybe competitive
hmm
iron companies? That's maybe what she was thinking.
Well, I think if she hadn't gotten suspicious, like she said, she got suspicious because she was hanging out with her son. And so I think
True.
that if there wasn't that connection between the two of them, she would have let it go and been like, "Well, you're very good at your job. You can stay." But I think she wanted to get rid of Clara because she sensed that the two of them had an affectionate bond. And I mean, if I was a super rich old white lady in the 1960s and a lady's maid was trying to marry my son when I wanted him to be married to like one of the upper echelons of New York society so we could just move higher, like I would be upset too. I would say I would be just as evil. Maybe not as like vindictive about it, but I'd be like, hey, bye. Goodbye.
That was a pretty siner scene where,
It
you know,
was.
Claire is just like smile on her face is almost vindictive, and I'm like, oh, is she
Hmm.
gonna kick you out? Like, and then
Yeah.
everyone else, how do you not know where your lady is? And it's like, oh, this isn't good. This
Hmm.
isn't
She
good.
should have packed her bag and just left the house at that point.
Well, she needed the shares first.
Oh, that's true. That's true. She didn't know she would get it, but I'm glad she got them. One thing I
Yes.
did dislike, though, is you mentioned her family earlier, and the fact that the author at the very end threw in the fact that her younger sister died. I was like, why did you do that? She's been working so hard, and you have to throw in that piece of tragedy?
Yeah.
Oh, I was like, why? That made me so sad.
Well, and the money that she sent home was just enough to get her to the doctor. It had been too long. She was too far gone. And it was like,
Yeah.
oh, even worse.
Hmm.
And then to find out her other sister, um, her engagement was broken off. They lost all the land. And then we find out her father is actually the leader of a rebellious group. And then we never hear about it again.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what was the purpose for that little tidbit? Because obviously there was a part in that historical timeline where there was an uprising, but why was that put in there? Like,
Hmm.
what logical sense does that make to this story? It doesn't. It doesn't make any
It's true.
sense. I mean, obviously it made sense for why the land got taken, all this stuff. How did it impact the story as a whole? You
Yeah.
think about those things when you start getting in background characters, you're like, okay, what's the importance of these people? Like, what are they going to bring to the story? And it's like, they bring anything to the story. I don't think they did.
Yeah, and I think that's just the way the author writes. Her historical fiction focuses more on the fiction, or not even the fiction, but it focuses more on the story of the main character, and doesn't kind of dive deep into the historical part around it. So you'll read it. If you're a historical buff, you're probably going to be mad because you're like, why? Why didn't you go into this Irish Revolution thing? Like this whole plot line is dropped. But I think that's just the choice the author made in her style of writing. So,
Okay. No, that
mhm.
makes a lot of sense. Um, so my last question for you is, knowing what we know now, was industrialization all it was cracked up to be?
Uh, meh. Yes and no. I think we kind of learned from our mistakes and industrialization definitely had some large mistakes to it. Um, but if we didn't go through it, we also wouldn't be where we are now with our whole host of problems, but we wouldn't have free public libraries.
I also think of it as a business sense, though. Just think of
Hmm.
like those people that saw that opportunity for industrialization to like get going,
Hmm.
is to be at that forefront of, like to be the ones that were the main starters. It just kind of
Hmm.
don't have that kind of ingenuity. So
Yeah.
to read about these people that do, to be like, man, you were at the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
Understanding that this was the type of business to get into. I mean, the Carnegies obviously weren't thinking about that right away. They were thinking about iron as their source of, Sardis,
Hmm.
what she was mending shoes, cobbling shoes. So how do you go from that to iron empire? Like it's crazy.
I've actually been thinking about that kind of lately. I was reading another book. It was a nonfiction book, um, and it was about Indian billionaires. So like people from because like India now has a whole new section of their society which is filled with billionaires, and China too.
Yes.
And it's like that same wave that hit the US where we got our millionaires at the time, um, is hitting other places now, which is like, oh, in China and India now they're getting at the forefront of whatever business, I'm not that knowledgeable in that, but like there's these business horizons where it's like if you catch it at the right time, you're taken off and you become one of those people that are a billionaire. So
Yeah.
so
That
it's interesting.
makes me wonder if probably some of those right now are really getting into the tech industry. I feel
Hmm.
like technology, as we have seen because of this pandemic, is so important.
Hmm.
Some of these people have figured out a way to bank on it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. And I feel like the internet was one, like there's that wave that we had like with Silicon Valley and we had those billionaires and we got it here in the US. Um, and I feel like maybe China and India, the fact that they have so many people and cheap labor, they have been able to like balloon out into having their section of billionaires. So it's really interesting to see how that goes with history. I don't
and
know.
how they're able to kind of almost see beyond their
Hmm.
generation, like this is gonna continue on, and you're like, yeah, okay, okay. And
Yeah.
then it does, and you're just like, their brain was
Yeah, they were able to
10,
get it.
20 years ahead of us.
Yeah. My hope though is that, well, maybe not a complete Carnegie, but like at least some sort of Carnegie that recognizes that even though they're making all this money, that hopefully they have a Claire Kelly or they have some sort of inspiration, which is that all this money that they're making needs to go back to everybody, or at least benefit the world that they're living in. So it doesn't have to
Mhm.
be free public libraries, but it should be something.
Definitely, I can agree to that.
Yeah. All
Well,
right.
I guess we're done.
Yeah, so that was all of our questions. We highly encourage you to read this book, even though there's stuff we disliked. There's lots that we liked, and
A
if you
lot.
like this book, then you'll definitely like the other books by Marie Benedict. So she has The Other Einstein, The Only Other Woman in the Room, Lady Clementine, and I think her name is popping up a lot because she just released one called The Mystery of Mrs. Christie. So I think that's based off of I'm blanking, the mystery writer. Agatha Christie.
Oh, Agatha
Agatha
Christie.
Christie. So yeah. So this is the type of book she tends to write, and so if you like this one, you'll like her other ones. Um, so
Oh,
yeah.
and you know what? We're gonna have to check out her other one that she's co-writing. Will be released in June this year. The Personal Librarian.
Oh, see, there we go.
We're in.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention my background. I like put a background on this, even though it's kind of a little bit weird. But this is actually from the bookshelves of the Carnegie Library in Philadelphia. So I thought it was fitting. It's more
I
interesting than my
agree.
office. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for APL Readers Corner, and I hope you liked us talking about this book and that you will check it out yourself.
And don't forget to check out next month. We will be doing A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallero. It's a YA book, so that'll be fun.
Oh, fun. All right. Well, hope you guys all have a nice day.